Hello and welcome to week 2 in Introduction to Sociology. I hope you had a very good first week learning about sociology itself and learning about some of the research methods associated with that. What I'm going to be doing is posting these little videos each Monday morning. They'll be available by Monday morning for the week, and providing essentially a brief lecture on the material. Now I say brief, so far I've done 5 of these today, and they're running at about 45 minutes. And so I'm not sure if that's brief or not. But sort of replacing the time that I would spend kind of emoting or professing what I know to these things. And so, because we have no time in synchronous communication, we're not online at the same time. So I'll be posting these videos and they will appear in the announcements section. So let's take a look at Brightspace right now, review some of the critical things that you need to know moving forward. Most of you are all set, but just a wee little bit of review of my expectations when it comes to using Brightspace. So again, I'm expecting to go into Brightspace fairly regularly and check this first section that you come across, which is the announcements. This is where you're seeing this video. And after that, you pretty much go to content, and this is the heart, soul, and the playground and fun stuff that we have here in the class. We have, of course, where the syllabus is here. Make sure you read that. Introductions, we just got done that part of the class. Under course documents, make sure that you scroll to the bottom. You go to textbook and coursebook information, and that you've downloaded a copy of the sociology textbook right there, and that you've selected the version of the coursebook. A little right click on each one of these will actually download the file to you. And a little bit about the difference between the PDF version and the EPUB version of the coursebook is the PDF, of course, is a smaller document. It's a universal document, will play on any device. The EPUB is the same thing, plays on any device, but you need a reader for it. Now, ideally, the EPUB is good for your iPad, for your tablet, for your phone, those kind of things. The PDF will play on those as well, but the embedded videos, which I'm going to show you in just a little bit, in the EPUB version, when you click on the video image, it will actually play the video right in the book. Whereas in the PDF version, you click on that or the title, and it will bring you to YouTube. It'll actually bring you out of the book into the YouTube. That's the only difference between those two. So make sure you have those. Now, in terms of sequence, I usually have, and I might have even already said it, read the textbook, read the course book, do the assignments, blah, blah, blah. I'm gonna modify that a little bit. I would like you to read the course book first and do the assignments. Sometimes the assignments will ask you for information that's in the textbook, so have it handy, and so you can go and do that research. That will get you to focus on the stuff for the class, the assignments in the class. Then after that, read the textbook. And I really encourage you, of course, you don't have to, right? Let's just be pragmatic here. You can do this whole class and do well in it without reading the textbook. You will get a lot more out of this. There's a better author than my course book is writing the textbook. There's more detail. The course book is really a few of my favorite things, not necessarily your favorite things. And so you might find really interesting information in the textbook that I don't even include in my version of this class. So that's sort of the broad spectrum of stuff in sociology. The course book focuses on what I would lecture about, those kinds of things, and how to do the assignments. Of course, that's vital. Make sure you do that part. That is required. The textbook is, I guess, not really required, but really, if you have the chance, even just to skim through it and just kind of get a sense. Very, very well. I didn't put it in there for no reason. So what we want to do today is take a look at the chapters 3 and 4. Culture first. Let me get the course book up and running here and tell you what I know about culture. So here we have as an introduction to culture, we talk about that it is all around us. The culture exists much as water does to a fish. In fact, it is so pervasive, water is so pervasive to a fish that they probably don't recognize the existence of water because it's everything around them. So as I look about my room and I see a camera and I see a glass of water and I see my laptop and I have a couple lights up here and I see my jacket and my guitar collection and, in my office, and that is all aspects of my material culture. Everything that we have around us is part of culture. So the fact that we have tables, like I'm sitting in front of right now, is an aspect of my culture, and that shapes the way I experience the world. Now, in addition to that, when let's say, if you think of Indiana Jones as an individual who is an archaeologist, essentially archaeologists explore the material culture of ancient civilizations. So all that's left is the table, the computer, the camera, the lights, kind of thing like that. And from that, they try and understand the other aspects of someone's culture: norms, values, expectations, education, rituals, religion, social structure, all of those things. They try and get that from the material culture. So we know there's a connection between the material and the non-material aspects of culture. So if all I had to go on to understand modern culture in America was this table, what assumptions could I make about the people who made this table, who used this table? What assumptions can I make? And those assumptions about norms, values, and expectations, that's the phrase I use to kind of embody all of that. Those assumptions are a lot of what this course is going to be doing. We're going to be looking at them in some generic ways, and then we're going to be looking at specific institutions that exist within cultures and how those institutions play a role in defining those aspects of our lived experience of culture. So at the beginning, culture is all around us. We get into the learning outcomes for this chapter. We're going to discuss the components of material and non-material culture. And we're going to describe the college classroom. Here, this online class that we're having, and look at the norms, values, and expectations and material culture of it. So let's get right into it. So culture is, as I say, just like water to a fish. It's all around us. It's made up of the objects and technology that characterize our culture. This is our material culture. And then non-material culture, values, norms, and expectations. This exists within all cultural entities, cultural groups. Symbols and language are a very important part of culture, and there are cultural universals. Now, cultural universals are those aspects of culture that exist in all cultures, even cultures that have not communicated with each other. So wherever we go throughout the world, there are always language. That's a specific part of human cultures, always language. Often there's a symbolic language. We have writing, but there's also symbols and what they mean. There's symbolic things. There's actually universal symbols, symbols that repeat themselves around the world. So the circle and a cross and a zagged line or the mountain or a wave, those kinds of symbols replicate themselves across societies throughout history. There's also certain kind of roles and expectations that we'll be getting into in the next chapter in social structure, where we talk about there's certain jobs that always appear. There's people, there's harvesters, there's planters, there's educators, there are religious people, there are leaders, there are barbers, there are people that do makeup, there are people that make clothes, there's people, all of these, those are universals. And even to the point, I had a very good friend of mine at one time who he was an outdoor adventure survivalist. And in his training, he encountered a list of universal aspects of children's play. So right down to this idea of how children play can be seen with universal eyes. So in this long list, which I lost at some point in my career, and I would really like to find it again, it listed all the ways, and wherever you go in the world, you'll find children playing in these ways. For one thing, a universal game is tag. So tagging and someone being it, and they have to chase after you and tag you, has existed in all cultures throughout history. So is hide and seek. So is games of like one faction against the other. So like in my childhood, it was, armies against armies, or cowboys versus Indians, or something as culturally inappropriate as that is today. There were, those battles, kind of things. Telling scary stories, running around in a circle till they get dizzy and fall down, sticking sticks into holes, looking at spiders eat things, looking at insects, and all that stuff. And one of the things that was right at the end of the list, poignantly put at the end of that list, is actually na 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 na, that phrase. Not the words, but the melody. Do 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 do. That melody is found to be universal. So and have the same meaning. So in another language, they might not use na 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 na, or na 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 boo boo. Those kinds of. They might have other sounds, but they follow the same melody. And for some reason, that has its existence in human culture universally. So you go to another country and you look at a kid and you go, na 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 na. They're probably going to know what you're talking about, and they're going to know I'm like teasing you, or I'm saying I've got something that you don't, or I won and you lost, or something like that. So fascinating aspects of our culture that end up being universal. Now, in the study of sociology, we study a lot of major themes, and one of the major themes that we discuss is universal versus specific. Now, there might be universal things such as religious leaders, but then we see the manifestation of that as being specific, not only within a country, let's say, or a region, but also within your family and possibly within you as an individual. So we see this universal quality of it, and then we can bring it right down to the individual and ask, how is this affecting you? How is this a part of your particular experience or your sociological imagination, to say? So here we go into some of these aspects of and I want to make a clear definition here of what I mean when I'm talking about norms, values, and expectations, because there's a bit of crossover, admittedly, when we talk about each one of these. Norms, obviously norm is short for normal. If our own personal culture defines what is considered normal in terms of individual behavior. So what is a normal behavior? And we might even look I know in my developmental psych class, we often talk about in terms of the expectations of society have for acting your age, which we call the social clock, because it's separate necessarily from it's connected to the biological age, but it's separate from the psychological age. So we may have an expectation that a person at age 82 would be doing certain things that might not include skydiving, for example. That would be an anomaly from the norm. Not wrong in any way. In many cases, it's not wrong to be abnormal, but the norm would be that we may even have a picture. If we were together, I could ask you, picture a man 85 years old, and get a really rich picture, and I would ask you what he was doing, and you would maybe list off some, pretty normal things that we would expect a man of that age to be doing. And if I said, okay, now that person is actually hand gliding right now, did that appear in anybody's head? Probably not. Probably not, unless you have a grandfather that hand glides. And so that's what norms really refer to as norms of behavior. Values have to do with what's important and what is, again, you see the valuable. You see that in the word. We organize components in our life in a hierarchy. Some things are more important than others, and we may attribute these to norms of behavior. We may have a value system associated with our norm. So this is where we get some of the issues with race and gender equity and those kinds of issues. So if we have norms for behavior and we have those as a very high aspect of our hierarchy of values, we can sometimes come in conflict with individuals because they have different norms than we do. But the values are that it's an emotional connection to the importance of something, such as what we consider to be valuable. And finally, we have expectations. And this, even though it does connect to values and norms, in the groups that we belong to and we select, we often encounter and become a member of those groups because they have corresponding norms and values that we have or that we want. And we join groups or become a member of that group, or we are a member of the group like our family. And so the expectations are embedded within those norms and values. But expectations really have to do with how do we think the world works? So let's say in my family, the norm is that mom is the enforcer of the rules of the house. I value that as let's say as a woman growing up in that household, or a man, I guess that really doesn't matter. I value it. And so not only is it the norm in my house, and it's important to me that that person be the one in charge. Consider me going into another person's house where the mom isn't that. So there's a divergence from my norm, and it might affect me emotionally because it's my expectation. So as dad arises as the leader of the house, I might go, what the heck is that? That's not normal. That's not my normal. That's not. Now, of course, this is the experience of diversity, and as educated individuals, we can get around that and say, well, not every household is like mine, but we know that for some people, some of these norms are very, very important. So let's keep that in mind. So expectations are taking those norms and values and going out and like, how does the world work? And when we encounter that the world doesn't always work that way, we can sometimes have a little bit of conflict. In fact, I suspect that the norms, values, and expectations that you have that currently encompass your current sociological imagination should change over the duration of this course. You should be exposed to ways in which the world works that are outside of your normal experience. They're outside of your normal experience because we don't usually talk about them that way. Some of these topics we don't even talk about at all. But yet when we have an understanding through science, the science of sociology, we have different perspectives that come from that. And that's a really big, important aspect of expanding your ability, well, basically expanding your expectations that there's things that are different out there. I have found through my own personal study of psychology and sociology, those two areas combined, that I feel more comfortable in more areas of the world. I may not agree with something, may still not be my norm, but I can realize that my norm doesn't define the world. And I can understand where people are coming from. And I think that that's an advantage to have. It's an advantage that we wish maybe many people had. So that's our exploration of that. Here we go into ethnocentrism and xenophobia. Now, this is some psychology here where individuals, keep in mind that norm, values, expectations, that gets embedded in our psychology very early in life, and that becomes our model to which we compare all other aspects of our experience. So as we venture out into the world and become exposed to different, slightly different cultures, or maybe we go to someplace away and it's very different from us, or we hear about it like, wow, where's that coming from? We have a tendency to stay in our comfort zone. And that's ethnocentrism, is, my way is not only my way, it's the right way. And I may have a strong value system associated with that. Different people experience ethnocentrism to a different degree. Some people may be very open to other ways of being. They are still ethnocentric because it's expressed in their own choices. Now, that doesn't mean, as I've had some discussions with my daughter recently, who's in the process of moving to Chile, that there are aspects of that country that have attracted her to move there that she finds very in line with her own values and norms and expectations, although they're very different from the norms, values, and expectations of here in America that she was raised with. She may go there and assimilate those, and and the Chilean way of life or the Chilean culture may become a very important part of her real being, and she may abandon some of the norms, values, and expectations of her upbringing and adopt those, and she'll become essentially Chilean in a way, even though, American Chilean combination there. So even though there'll be still ethnocentric components, there's still, putting on old sneakers, there's still putting on old sneakers, but there's the ability to be able to accommodate and create new aspects of your norms and expectations through exposure to different cultures. Now, xenophobia is actually, when you look at the word phobia, and we have to be really careful because we throw that word around a little bit too much. But phobias interfere with our lives. They interfere with our functioning. A phobia is an irrational fear. And so make sure that we use that correctly, an irrational fear. It's an irrational fear of something. So arachnophobia is an irrational fear of arachnids or spiders. So we have phobias. And xenophobia is a fear or a feel of being threatened by the existence of another culture or another kind of people or another set of norms, values, and expectations. Someone can feel threatened by that. We often interpret discrimination, let's say, against Muslims or against persons of color, and as fear-based, as these individuals have a different culture, they have different norms, values, and expectations. I think that that's true to a degree. I think it's not true, and I think there's habitual behavior that also gets involved in some discrimination and expressions more of the norms than they are of fears per se. But certainly there's a mix of expressed, embedded norms associated with xenophobia or real fears, substantial fears of loss of culture or something like that, that combine together to form what we see today as phobic behavior, homophobic or Muslim phobic or or diversity phobic in many ways. We see it as a combination of the cultural embeddedness of difference as well as xenophobia. So there's a little video in there about xenophobia and that we live actually in a pluralistic society. We don't necessarily have a melting pot per se. Melting pot, it kind of takes all the ingredients, blend into a unique solution. Let's say you have butter, eggs, flour, and water all mixing together, but the fundamental dough that comes out of it doesn't look like any one of those characteristics. We are really looking at a pluralistic society that has some crossover, okay, where things blend. Chinese food restaurants in America don't serve food that is identical to Chinese food in China. They've been Americanized to some degree. So there's that bit of crossover, but we're much more pluralistic, meaning we have existing cultural entities or cultural categories of individuals. Some are broad spectrum, some are very narrow, some are right down to the family in terms of how we experience them. But we really are a multicultural society with, notwithstanding that there is an overarching set of values associated with American culture. In fact, those ideals are often what attract people to come to America, and some of those, as of late, have been, they're being put under the microscope, and there's an opportunity for values clarification going on right now. And are we going to stick to those values that have actually, in my opinion, made this country what it is today? So in our course book, we look into pluralistic societies such as ours. We have different cultures such as popular culture or pop culture, countercultures, subcultures, and co-cultures. And I just want a little bit about that. subcultures and co-cultures. My esteemed colleague Mark McCafferty, who teaches communication, and I've had several discussions about this, and we see, we kind of look at, like, if you look at other existing cultures within a community, other sets of norms, values, and expectations, traditions, material culture, and whatnot that we can identify. It might be an ethnicity or something, or persons of color. And we see them as from a communication standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, from all of that, we want to experience those as coexisting cultures that have a certain equity associated with them, that at a basic level there's a value system that says that they're all equal. So from a communication standpoint, we might use the word co-culture. However, one of the other themes that we discuss in sociology is inequality. In fact, as you can see in chapter 1, I discuss about inequality being the source of the need to have something like sociology to address problems of inequality. So when we talk about subcultures or dominant cultures or something like that, we're really talking about power dynamics. Both concepts are equally useful. When we want to bring people together, we have to talk about equity. We have to talk about a perception of co-cultures, coexisting, communicating, coalescing, all the co-words. We're going to bring people together. In order to do that, however, we have to recognize the reality of inequality. So as we as a country are embracing the notion of Black Lives Matter, and we're looking at a confluence of societies, of different worldviews coming together, and a realization, the woke status that people have of people of color live in a different culture than we do. That perception must be followed up by a realization that that has resulted in different power dynamics, access to resources, the ability for mobility, that has had real consequences. And our wokeness will come from when we realize that our small behaviors and our participation in larger organizations are a part of that. They're a part of that creation of inequality. And as we venture to bring people together on the co-level, we have to do so by addressing the inequality. We can't just ignore the inequality and say, okay, let's put that all behind us now, and because those inequalities are real. So those concepts remain constant of co and subdominant. Those kinds of areas that we talk about in sociology they're continual themes. And in our society right now, we are we're at a defining point in our society where we have to address, we're called on with today's society to address issues of inequality between the genders, between the differences that we have in colors, ethnicity, religion, education. Almost all the institutions that we're going to go through in this class bring up the notion of co and subdominant aspects of those cultures. So it's going to be important to keep that theme in mind all the time. So I talked a little bit about that, and then applying the perspectives on culture. Now, we've talked about the perspectives, the functional perspective, the conflict perspective, symbolic interactionist, postmodern, and rational choice exchange. We can talk about aspects of culture. So in the course book, I actually go into this class. So this class exists as a group. And we'll get into defining a group. But it's a group, and the group has a set of informal and formal cultural norms, values, expectations, and material culture. And we can look at that from the lens of function, conflict, symbolic interactionist, postmodern, and rational choice exchange. So without even looking at my book, let me just do it off the top of my head. So functionally, we can look, how does this all work? Now, in order for this class to work, we have to have technology. For you to be able to view this video, gain from my lecture, to apply your knowledge in the discussion quizzes and the assignments in this class, you have to have access to the internet. You have to have a computer. There's actually, that's part of the functioning part of it. And there's function in our roles. I've been preparing for this class for a couple months, putting material together, all of that. That's my role in this class. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next chapter. That's my role. My status as a teacher gives me the role of preparing material. You have the role of coming to class prepared, watch all the videos, read all the material, do all the assignments, and that's how learning works. So the functional perspective of this class is we have rules and regulations, expectations, norms of behavior, norms of, you have to have a working computer and all that, material culture in order for this to work. Now the conflict perspective is, well, what if some people don't have that? Now, we may not know of those people because they went to KV, found out that everything was online, knew they didn't have internet access or could not afford a computer, and they never signed up. So that inequality was never even realized. It never even happened. But let's say there's some people in this class that have very slow internet access. So they only have internet access through their phone. They might be watching this video and it is going like this, and how just frustrating that would be without the really good internet connection to enjoy these videos like you would enjoy a live lecture. So that might be some of the conflict there. There's also a power differential that I gladly talk about and recognize. I'm in charge of the grades, you're in charge of performance. So there's it's not adversarial, it's more partnership, but I do have that as part of my status and role, and that makes us a little unequal. I try to minimize that by having you call me by my first name, by an informal way that I interact with my students. I joke around a little bit. I'm not too uptight. And if there's problems that you have with the material, let's talk about it, and stuff like that, to try and minimize that inequality. But the inequality is still there. It's still there. It's by necessity when you have individuals who want to learn something from a content expert. So that there's always that inequality. Hopefully we can manage that inequality well, and that it doesn't become a barrier to education. Of course, it could be, and you may have come across as some instructors very authoritarian in the way they do and no flexibility at all, and that power dynamic is very stark in relief, and it becomes maybe a challenging class. Now, in terms of symbolic interactionist, this is, what does this mean to you? Now, hopefully, my goal, because nobody here is a major in sociology, but I'm hoping to inspire you that this stuff is interesting and makes you a better and more effective citizen. So learning about these things, learning about sociology, even though you're not going to become a sociologist, makes you an educated person. And you might see some things in here, let's say religion or education is very important to you, and when we look at those through the various lenses, you may strengthen that particular institution in your life because you can see it from such different perspectives. And just what does this degree mean to you? Maybe you're the first person in your family to get a college degree, let alone take a sociology class. And or maybe some of this is going to be eye-opening, and you're gonna find that you accommodate some of your value systems to be more accommodating to differences in diversity. Maybe that'll be something that'll happen, and that would be very meaningful for you. So that's that symbolic interactionist perspective. In terms of postmodern, we can look at this class as obviously technology and communication. And we can see how that relates to all of the others. Our comfort level with technology, the ability for us to communicate digitally like this. But there's also commerce. So we always look at, consumer behavior. You picked KV. We're less expensive. For some of you, going online is a horrible experience. Some of you are going, wow, I am saving on gas. And you prefer that, so all of this, our economies, our role as a consumer, as a purchaser of products. You have purchased this class. You're a customer. In some ways, you're a customer, and I have to meet the needs of my customer and make sure that my customer is satisfied with their product, while at the same time, I still have that power dynamic. So it's kind of a delicate place to. I don't find it interferes with what I do, but it's certainly an interesting dynamic to keep in mind as we work together. And finally, rational choice and exchange. It's really embedded in this class. You have things to do, and there will be rewards for those things. When you have successfully completed the work, I will grant or bequeath upon you good grades, and at the end you'll get a grade to step toward your goals, all that stuff. And it's rational. We're working out. It's kind of worked out in the syllabus. So the syllabus is really a contract, and it kind of embeds itself in that rational choice exchange theory kind of thing. You may also go into the discussions, and you may see someone has posted a question in the course questions, and you have that answer, and you may go in and respond to that person, give them the answer they want, and the feedback is, I feel good about it. Or, you make a friend, or you make a connection, and maybe some other time during the class, the pay it forward sort of mentality, maybe that individual will answer a question for you, kind of in the big balance of things. So this course itself can actually be looked at from all of these perspectives. So you would be using what I just did as a model. You can look at you can look at your family, you can look at your favorite TV show. You got to really think creatively about some of this to see where the functional, conflict, symbolic, interactionist, postmodern, and rational choice theories come into play in every aspect of our society. So that's our tools of analysis. We can always be using those tools all the time. And those tools have resulted in the content of this class. So by researchers looking at our society from those different perspectives, we have now knowledge about how society works, how it doesn't work, the conflicts that happen in there, what it means to people, and all those other ways in which we can view our world. Now, we're into the assignments here really quickly. We have a discussion where I'm going to be providing you with a picture of an object. I'm going to be sending this to you individually. All objects represent some aspect of our culture, like this glue, okay? What you want to do in the discussion is you post the picture, name it, and describe the apparent use of that. In this sense, this glue stick things together, mostly paper and wood. Then what I want you to do is write a paragraph that uses that object in a symbolic manner to teach a lesson, a norm, or a value, or an expectation. And so in the example, I go into the idea that glue is like love. Like glue is a connection that keeps us together. And in a positive way. We can also be addicted. You could use the same, you could say, love holds us together like glue. Addiction holds me to my beer bottle like glue. It could be you can use that same analogy to kind of go beyond the just material culture. And it kind of drives home that point of the connection between non-material culture and material culture. Indiana Jones would love this assignment. And in the quiz, I want you to describe your personal norms, values, and expectations regarding to this class. Remember, norms is what is normal for your behavior and what you're going to be doing in this class. What are your values? Do you value good grades? Do you value feedback? Do you value, do you value information? Do you challenge yourself, and all that stuff? And then finally, expectations. That can be, what do you expect from me? What do you expect from your other, your classmates? And what do you expect from the material itself? Okay, so moving right along, we go into chapter 4, society and social interactions. And so let's switch to the course book again. And here we are, chapter 4, and we see, I've already talked about some of this stuff when I was talking about social structure and whatnot. And when we experience culture, like in this image, we have a person at the grocery aisle, okay? And just think about the experience of customer service and what that means in terms of norms, values, and expectations. So you go to the grocery store, and if you think about it, the ritual that we go through of gathering our items into a basket, going up to the cash register, laying them on the belt, and the interactions that we have with the clerk person that's there are pretty scripted. I mean, we can probably almost word for word kind of go through what's going to happen there. It's kind of a very strict ritual of how that happens and whatnot. Now, of course, now we have this new material culture with the shields, and we're on face masks, and they have that keypad that they spray all the time, and these different expectations that are there. And consider what would happen if something violated that. What would be something when we think about those, we're looking at status and roles. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but a status is a job title in society, and role is the job description. So that, just run with that there. So I'm a customer, and so that's my status, and my role is to go collect things, put it in the basket, take those things, put it on the belt, take the bags, put it in there, and pay. Okay. If I divert from any one of those, imagine going up to the cart. You know, you're there at the cart, and you roll up to the cart to the cash register, and you just stand there. And you say to the clerk, and say, can you unload this stuff onto the belt? Now, depending on the circumstances, if you were a person, because your status would have to, if you're a regular customer without any apparent need to have somebody help you with that, the people might look at you strange and like, no, your job is to load that that's your job. Cart to belt. But let's say you were an individual who was physically disabled and unable to do that, it'd be perfectly reasonable. So you see how status, I'm not only a customer with a disability that needs help in that particular way, store's no problem. But if I myself went and did that, and I'm standing there and I have no real apparent reason, and then I'm willing, I just like load my, they might do it, but boy, they wouldn't be happy about it. You know, that'd be a violation of that expectation. But let's look at one that's more clear. What if I just decide to skip the whole pay step? You know, and just like, okay, thanks a lot. This has been great. Nice talking to you. And I roll out. That's a violation of the norms, values, and expectations of our society because of how we feel about the status and role of customers. Now, we can look at this from a customer service point of view. What are my expectations for this? Are they supposed to be nice? Are they supposed to be kind? Are they supposed to say hi? Are they supposed to talk to me? Are they supposed to, what is that? And have you ever experienced a person who's having a bad day and really can't maintain those expectations for their own role? And boy, can that change your day. And that we're again in one of those like, wow, you're acting outside of the norm. And the norms that I have in my expectations were that you're going to treat me nice, you're not treating me nice. How do I feel about the store? How do I feel about you? Do I want to use some sign language? Whatever it is, however we want to respond to that. But certainly, when we look at social structure, when we move out into the world, we have norms, values, and expectations that we put upon the world, and our expectations that they will respond accordingly. That's how because we're older, we've been socialized, and there's a basis for that, because most of the time that I go out, admittedly, most of the time that I go into the store, everybody's following those rules. I've watched. People are paying, they're putting the stuff on the belt, the cash register is really nice, and and the bagging, and you just go through this ritual, and it's very rare that there's an anomaly with that. If you want to see some anomalies, just go scope out YouTube for a while. It's easy to find them there. Okay, so here we have sociology and everyday experience, kind of going with that. We're going to be talking about personal status and roles, because we have lots of them, role strain and conflict, and we're going to discuss one of my favorite topics in all of social sciences, which is looking glass self, and how that helps us construct our social identity. So off we go. Society in history. Because of technology, one of the forces of change in culture, from hunter-gatherer to pastoral, horticultural, agricultural, feudal, industrial, and then post-industrial, we see society has changed, and so have our statuses. Now, we in common vernacular, in common language, we use the role status, we use the words role and status interchangeably. Like, if I go up to you and if someone came up to me and say, what's your role in the family? I might say father. I'm a father in my family. For sociology reasons, that's not true. My role is the job description for father. So what's a father? So we look at different societies, and we look at our own society, and what do we mean by father? What's that supposed to be? Maybe we got it when we were kids. Maybe we didn't. But we're very aware of maybe what that should have been or what it was. So we might say, the individual was a caring person in my life, an adult male role model. They were, in my family, they were responsible for mechanical repairs. They were the primary breadwinners, let's say, or they were not, or they were the caregivers, or they were not, or whatever. Just whatever we feel of was the father role. Traditional father roles, non-traditional father roles. We have these things. You have the job title, father, and then you have what's that supposed to look like. So when you think of status and roles, they come together all the time. Now I have, let's say, multiple statuses in my life. I even have multiple statuses in my family. I am a father, I am a stepfather, and I am a husband. Each one of which may have different, like father and stepfather. I gotta trust you. Those of you who are step-parents, you know that those are slightly different from each other, depending on the relationship that you've been able to establish with your stepchildren and the relationship you have with your natural children. The role I have with my wife is obviously different than I have with my kids, different expectations for my behavior, and how would you define by our commitment to one another and our love for each other. And so even within the family, let's go beyond that. Both my parents have passed away, but I was a son in the same family. I'm a brother. That's another status. I'm an uncle. I'm a step-uncle. I'm a cousin. And we're just all looking at all these different statuses. That's just in my family. Go outside of that, and you have, in your organization, I'm in a band, okay? So one status I have is bass player. One status I have is group psychologist. The other status I have is I'm the guy that does the web, okay? Then we have Kevin, the drummer. He's the drummer, but he's who we call, he's the dad. So he makes all the arrangements for travel, books hotels, books flights, does all that stuff, finds the restaurants and all that stuff. That's his role. And then, so those are his different, his status is mom, that's what we call it, and he does those roles. Gerald, the leader of the band, does all of the bookings, does all of the coordination, motivation, sets practice schedules, sets the dynamics for the client, for the whole band, and is the figurehead of the band, and we call him Mom. And so Mom of the band, includes all of that stuff to do, and these work out as a balance. In fact, that's a very enjoyable group because each one of us have our established expectations for each other. So. Just today, actually, as I'm doing this video, Gerald, we've been out of contact because of COVID. We're preparing for some concerts later in the year. And so Gerald sent out, Mom sent out an email to everybody with links to original versions of Elton John songs, and he wants us to peruse those to find areas where we might enhance our individual contributions to those songs and bring them in line or just be inspired by the original recordings. And he had some suggestions for each member of the band and stuff like that. That's his job. That's what he does. And so he sent that out, and we're responding, with like, yeah, I got this part. I'm like, look at the bridge on, Rocket Man, and I think I can do the bass part more like that one. And so we're having these online conversations to refine our craft and our show. So you see how status and roles play out. And what if I wrote back and said, no, I might not be in the band for very long, kind of thing. 14 years running, we've all sort of, got it all worked out. But you, in your life, have multiple statuses, multiple job descriptions or roles that go with each one of those statuses. You can just list them up, just for me: husband, wife, all those family ones, band member, psychologist, faculty member, faculty union rep, the Center for Civic Engagement director, member of I'm on 3 boards of directors, for Campus Compact, for a couple organizations in the community. I'm a member of a church. All of these things, and look at the church. I'm the bass player in the band at the church, but I haven't been going because of COVID. And so all these things that we do, we balance these. And what we're going to be talking about is when we have multiple statuses, all of which we have. Sometimes we have conflicts in the roles, let's say. So, a classic one going on right now. My oldest daughter, is getting married in October. It just so happens that in the moving of gigs because of COVID, one of the gigs in my band moved over, and it was rescheduled right on my daughter's wedding day. I was unaware of that. I didn't even connect it. And so it wasn't until later, it was just about a month ago, that we discovered that. And I was like, oh my God, there's a gig and it's out of state. It's in Pennsylvania. And so I was experiencing a role conflict, meaning I can't be in 2 places at the same time. I have one status, band member, that has the role, go to the gig. I have another status called father, which means give away the bride. Can't be in 2 places at the same time. So that is what's called a role conflict. And so therefore, to resolve that, one of them had to go. Trust me, it wasn't the wedding. So I got in touch with the band, did this. There's a little bit of disappointment because I was a little late. It was a hard gig to get rescheduled, but we have a norm in the band that was established before I was even in there, 20 years. Family first. It's actually a written part of the band contract that we have, that family comes first no matter what. So if there's a family event that's important that interferes, of course we try to prevent those things from happening, but family comes first. And this was sort of an enactment of that. So even though there's some disappointment from our agents and the rest of the band, crap, this is a really good gig, the end game was like family first. So I was very relieved that we had that, as part of the band, and it wasn't a threat to my role in the job. But you see where we can have multiple statuses and sometimes they conflict with each other. The strain that you feel, I used the word, is strain between us when it's hard to do all of them at the same time. So when you have a lot of plates spinning, or you wear a lot of hats, you have a lot of different things, you have kids, husband, house, job, school, all of these things, what you're experiencing is what sociologists call role strain, because you have so many job descriptions that sometimes it's hard to get them all done. So you have to end up prioritizing. So here's the sociological perspective of stress management, that stress is really the appearance at times of role conflict when you're like, crap, I can't do both of these things at the same time. And then the almost pervasive experience of role strain, which is I've taken on too many things. Or I've taken on, well, let's say not too many, sort of a value judgment on that, but I've taken on a lot of things and I'm having trouble getting them all done. So that's role strain. So if you're experiencing that, remember that when you're not only a student, but say you're a student in 4 classes and each one of them has a role. You have to get all the work done for each one of those. For some people, they might realize at some point in the semester that maybe they got to bring that down to 3 and lower the degree of my role strain. Or I've even seen when we were meeting face to face, there was even some times when I've had somebody in my class and they experienced a role conflict. They had a job change and then the new job actually required them to be on the job during the time that the class was meeting. What do you do with that? You can't be in 2 places at the same time. Clearly they went to the job and they had to find another way to complete the class or drop the class and take it another time or work, going to an online class or something like that. So that's kind of how we experience sociology in that world that we call stress, and how we manage that and how we manage both our statuses and our roles. So I go through that here in the course book here. 2 other areas, I lectured a lot on that, but didn't even get into the ascribed and achieved. This is another really cool thing. Some of the statuses that we have, we were born with, and others, we worked for them. And there are often value aspects to those things. So let's say I was a son of my parents, okay? That was bequeathed upon me. I didn't, well, maybe I was up in heaven and did it, but, my real, it was thrust upon me. They're my parents, like them or not, they're my parents. And so that would be an ascribed status. However, I became a husband because I picked somebody. I was active in the selection process and creating that new part of that new status. So being a husband was not what that was achieved. I achieved that status. Getting a degree is achieved. It's interesting to sometimes examine, when we talk about health, we're going to be talking about health status. And we're going to revisit this in terms of ascribed versus achieved and how society values differences between an ascribed illness, meaning you didn't do anything to get it, and an achieved illness where you got sick because you did something, and how we perceive those as different and how interesting that is. We can also look at wealth that way. We can look, did you achieve your wealth status, or was it ascribed? You inherited it, or you just grew up in a wealthy family or with fortune. So, and the way we perceive that, the self-made millionaire is different than the millionaire that won the lottery. You know what I mean? So we see this kind of manifest, the ascribed versus achieved part, when we take value systems and apply them to statuses and roles. So we want somebody's status. We want to know people's status, I'm going to get into that. Once we learn somebody's status, we then, okay, well, is this achieved or ascribed from my viewpoint? And that's how we start to begin to develop a social perception of that individual. Now, in order for communication to happen, we sometimes need to communicate our status. Who am I? So and I've done this at various times, but at times it's been appropriate for me to establish myself, see where the root word is the same, establish status, to place myself in the appropriate location within the social situation I'm in. When I've been introducing myself, I've added doctor at the beginning of my name, that's an achieved status, that I have a PhD, so I put I'm Dr. Mark Kavanaugh. Now the impact that has is purposeful. It's if I have a goal to influence this place, and the use of my doctorate is appropriate. You can do that inappropriately too, but the use of my doctorate is appropriate in this situation. I want to have that status. I want to have the recognition of a particular level of achievement so that my contributions will be maybe more impactful. Now, if I'm at the garage and, what's your name, sir? And I go, Dr. Mark Kavanaugh. What the heck difference does it make there, right? I mean, what are you, a doctor? I'm a psychologist. Well, you know nothing about a carburetor. You're right. I don't know anything about a carburetor. You're the doctor. You're the car doctor. You're the one with that status. So those things are appropriate to situations. These are called status symbols. The letters, either at the beginning, DR or PhD on my name, are status symbols that designate achievement. There are other status symbols that I could have: the type of car that I drive, the type of house, the type of clothes, the people I know. These are status symbols. They're expressions to the world that can be read that determine status. A white lab coat, a police officer badge, a fireman's hat, any one of those things, they determine status. And we then, based on our cultural norms, values, and expectations, we have a job description that we assume goes along with that. So if you're walking in the mall and you see someone that has a little white square on a otherwise black collar, you might say that person's a religious priest or cleric or brother or something like that. And I would have a certain, based on my own cultural experiences, I would have a set of expectations as to people in that status. So if that individual suddenly started breakdancing in the middle of the room and, dropping the F-bomb everywhere, I'd be like, I wonder if that's just a costume, because it's diversion from, it's not that people who are priests can't break dance and swear. It's that it's not within the norm, values, and expectations I have of that particular status. So it would strike me as odd. Okay, and the degree to which I felt, flexible about that, it may bother me. So that's where we see status symbols, and it defines what we expect from people. And certainly when we look at issues that have been going on in the past, the priest abuse scandal, the coaches and the role they played in abuse as well, politicians, crooked politicians and stuff like that. And we look at those things, and it's like the problem with that is amplified because we hold those statuses to high esteem. Politicians are supposed to be upfront and really, otherwise we wouldn't complain when they weren't. If we're complaining that a politician is crooked, that means we have an expectation that they're not. We can't then say, oh, that's crooked, like, well, they're all crooked. If they're all crooked, that's expectation. It shouldn't bother you because that's the norm. Okay? But our expectation is that they're not that way, that coaches take care of their kids and protect them. They're not abusers. And certainly priests do not abuse altar boys or other people that they have, other children they have encountered with. When those things happen, they affront us because they're so valuable aspects of our social expectations. So let's look at the course book again here. I have a status symbol here of a Mercedes. If you saw me driving around with a Mercedes, what would you think? You might think I stole it. You might think I make a lot of money. And when we look at status symbols and we start talking about perceptions of inequality, we were just talking about in the last chapter about culture, and we look at people of color or people, does it make a difference? Would it make a difference if you saw a person of color driving a Mercedes versus a white person driving a Mercedes? Now, this is an internal process, and maybe it would make a difference. And maybe you don't like the fact that it's going to make a difference, but recognizing that maybe it does make a difference is a clue to you as to some growth that you might want to experience as a result of this class, if we had expectations for that. And so by realizing the importance, in this case, of status, role, and status symbols, and our expectations to those as they associate with gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, and because those are statuses, and we have expectations for those, and they may not be in line with reality. So this is the education. This is the place to examine those things for yourself. So I talk about achieved and ascribed status and disability. You can read that, and then role, strain, and conflict here, kind of just a little expanding on that stuff. Then we look at looking glass self. And I believe this is going to be the last topic here before we go into, yep. So I want to think about looking glass self. Looking glass self is a theory that was put forth by Charles Cooley. Now, and it's very, very cool theory, I think. And what it is as we grow up, and I want you to perceive looking glass self as consisting of a committee. Now, the simplified explanation for looking glass self is when I am formulating viewpoints of myself, I collect data, just like a little scientist. So I look at my own behavior and I can value it or not value it. The looking glass self proposes the idea that a large part of our self-evaluation or perceptions of self come through this process. I look at myself as if I'm looking in a mirror. That's where you get the looking glass part. Looking glass is another name for a mirror, like in Alice stepped through the looking glass. So I'm looking in a mirror and I'm seeing me, any aspect of me, my intelligence, my abilities, my behavior, my looks, my weight, my height, athletic ability, whatever. I'm looking at that in the mirror. And I'm imagining individuals and what I think their value systems about what I'm observing. And so I look at, say, I'm a little overweight. But I'm probably a lot overweight. And so I look at myself and I see myself as an overweight. And then I think about, in the process of applying looking glass, I look at my brother, Jim, who is very athletic, slim, muscular, kind of thing like that. And actually has kind of a thing about weight. So, and if he was on my looking glass self, and I looked at him and I said, well, if Jim saw this, he would think this is disgusting. And to a degree, I can adopt that. Because Jim is an important person in my life, I can adopt that as a view of my own self. And adopt that viewpoint and therefore achieve or ascribe to myself that I'm disgusting. Because this important person in my life that sits on my looking glass committee has that viewpoint. Now, at the beginning of our lives, people come onto our committee without our knowledge, without our say. Our parents, our siblings, our uncles, important teachers and whatnot. And as you probably well know, we've had both positive and negative experiences with people. And sometimes when we actually go through the psychological process of saying, I feel like I'm not good at math because my teacher in 4th grade told me I'm not good at math, you're looking at this early developmental event that occurred as the process of the establishment of looking glass self or your committee. Now, psychologically, there could even be a practice of like, well, who's on your committee? Do you still want these individuals to have that role in your life? Do you still want them to have that status? Maybe you can kick them off the committee. And maybe you're not going to use that viewpoint. It's easier said than done. But as adults, we can start selecting who we're going to keep on that committee. So let's say I had a conflictual relationship with my brother Jim, and he was always calling me fat and always made me feel bad. I could go through the internal process, a long process probably, of kicking him off the committee so that when I'm doing this process, everybody that's on my committee is actually not the kind of person that's going to pick on me for my weight. And so now if you think of this generically as we all have a committee, we all have people on that committee who are going to be always on that committee because they're related to us. I could probably never remove Jim completely. I don't want to. I have a great relationship with my brother. Even people who are passed away can remain on our committee. Even people who existed thousands of years ago. If you're a Christian or a Muslim, you might look to models in your religion as those individuals are on your committee. Jesus is on my committee. He's pretty critical. Trying to hold me up, trying to make me a better person. That's my world. And so I could look at my behavior and say, what would Jesus do? That statement is actually an example of looking glass self. I'm going to look at my behavior and say, well, would Jesus have done that? If I have adopted myself that I want to live my life like he did, and that's important to me as a choice, that's fine. Sometimes, however, we end up in a relationship, let's say, and we have a partner and that person's extremely critical. And because they're a partner, what intimacy really is we put people who we're intimate with, not sexuality, people we're intimate with, get a chair on that committee. And so the trust that we have on this board of directors here in our lives is very, very, very valuable. You are a person that's valuable enough to select members of your own committee. Now that said, we can also go the other extreme. We have stories in our world such as the downfall of Michael Jackson, who clearly selected people on his committee and only listened to people on his committee who reinforced the fantasy life that he seemed to have going on. Nobody came in to check and balance him. We need checks and balances in our lives. We need mentors to say, stop, what you're doing is not right. We need those throughout our lifespan. So as managers of our committee, we can apply the looking glass theory to understand how people have influenced through our lives, how people continue to influence our lives, and how as adults we can now manage the membership of that committee for personal growth, to challenge us, to support us, and to protect us from people who want to destroy us or to hurt us. So very, very valuable concept, very challenging when you have challenging members on that committee. And I've actually been in the process of working with people who are in counseling, who never, deep issues with parental figures that they were never able to please, that they're never able, and the person has passed away. And yet their presence on the committee is still deeply felt. That's a challenge. That's a real challenge in dealing with looking glass self. So here we go into the other assignment. So we have a discussion. I want you to look at looking glass self and talk about some of who you are and kind of what I've just been talking about. And share some thoughts about your sense of self. Where did these concepts come from? Did they come from members of your looking glass self? Likely many of them did. Are some of your self-concepts not in line with evidence, yet you accept them as truth? Like I'm not good at math, but in truth you are. You're balancing your account all the time. You're taking math classes and you're doing fine, but yet you still have that idea in your head that you're not good at math. How odd, but how common that is, that people will have that kind of thing. And then we go into the quiz to describe 3 sets. That's a job description, a job title, job description, status, roles. Describe 3 of those in question 1. And then based on that list, I want you to describe at least 2 role strains or conflicts. 1 role strain and a conflict, or 2 conflicts or 2 role strains, either way, that come from there. So you say you've listed, student, employee, be specific, employee, and then girlfriend. So you're all 3 of those things. And then on the bottom you say, well, sometimes I have to go to work and I work overtime and I'm not able to get my work done for class. So there's a role strain, sometimes a role conflict. You know, you get called in on the day you wanted to get that paper done. Crap. You know, and then you have a role conflict, and kind of talk about those. Bring them to your awareness, because working with those statuses and roles in your life is a lifelong process of balance, where one of your roles has to be self-care. That has to be, that it's another, not a role, status. You have to have a status of owner of the body, owner of the mind. You know, that me. That has to be a status, and how well and how you prioritize the job description of that, which includes eating well, getting rest, drinking water, exercise, avoiding smoking, not drinking a lot, you know, and just, you know, the self-care thing, you know, hanging around good people. Where do those self-care things balance with everything else? Because I've often found when I've been talking with students that self-care comes last. Now, it's not that it comes first. Your kids come first. Yeah, and for many of you, your spiritual life or your religious life comes first. That's okay. But you have to address self-care along the way. And so somewhere in there, self-care has to be addressed so that there's a balance without causing too much of that strain. And in some cases, role conflict. So long lecture here, but I hope this is a good review of the material and the expectations for this week. And I look forward to seeing you in the discussion boards and reading your responses to these quizzes. So take care.